Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. It's good to be back here at the masjid one more time. Inshallah, this is the last of the series of talks we've had this year. And the topic tonight is the end time alliance of Muslims and Christians, or between Muslims and Christians. As always, as we in the past, we have given a note of attribution. So we begin with a note of attribution that much of the material you'll hear today is sourced from the work of Sheikh Imran, and of course we have tried to expand it, and so we present it without any pretensions of scholarship. So when you hear opinions or arguments in here, you should accept it only if you are convinced that it is correct. Otherwise you should not accept it, because some of the things we'll be hearing, some of you may be hearing for the first time interpretations of the Quran, etc. So, with respect, inshallah, mutual respect, inshallah, we proceed. Prophet ﷺ said, you will make an alliance or sulh with Rum. He didn't say hudna, he says sulh. Sulh is peace, which implies an alliance. Hudna is like no fire, ceasefire, etc. He said sulh, which implies a pact, a military alliance. It is not about a student exchange program between Muslims and Rome. It is about a comprehensive political military pact. Right? The question that stares us in the face is, based on our past attitudes, is it even permissible for Muslims to have alliances, especially alliances with others? Let's try to answer this question. Of course, when Prophet ﷺ said you'll have sulh, we know it is more than just permissible, but in view of some of the prevalent attitudes, we want to try to explain this point. That in Surah Al-Anfal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. إِلَّا يَفْعَلُوهُ تَكُنْ فِتْنَةٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ كَبِيرٌ. Those who reject, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, the disbelievers, are allies of one another. And if you do not act likewise, there will be great fasad in earth. Okay. This is the meaning. So the kuffar are allies of each other. If you don't act in the same way, meaning if you too do not make alliances, there will be great fasad and corruption. So obviously you form alliances with people, only with people with whom you have positive relationships. If your relationships are not positive, you don't form alliances. So there has to be a basis for positive relationship, right? So, does the Quran speak of any people at all with whom the Muslims will have positive relationships? Does the Quran speak in a positive manner about any such people? Let's try to find out. Especially in context of relations with us. Positive mention, especially in contact with the relations with us as Muslims. Let's try to find out. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 82, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَتَجِدَنَّ مَوَدَّةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّا نَصَارَى. In this fi'l applies to, this tense applies to a present time as well as future time. So most certainly, وَلَتَجِدَنَّ, there's great emphasis. Most certainly, you'll find in time to come that those closest to you in love and affection are those who say we are Christians. Right? Now, this is Quran, so obviously it is incumbent upon us to try to find out who these people are. The Quran says that these people who will be calling themselves Christians will be closest to you in love and affection. So it behooves us that we should try to find out who these people are, right? So does the Quran help us in identifying who these people are? Yes, it does, and inshallah we'll try to learn. Okay. In the same ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ مِنْهُمْ قِسِّيسِينَ وَرُهْبَانًا. Among them will be monks and priests, ruhban, from rahib, etc. Meaning these will be a Christian people among whom prevalent will be the practice of monasticism. Monasticism is withdrawal from world and spiritual exercise, withdrawal from it. And you have heard of monasteries, the Greek monasteries, etc., etc. So in these people there will be monasticism prevalent. Now, we have a temporary monastic time in our lives, right? Which is actually in Ramadan. We have, in the last 10 days, what do? I'tikaf. So sort of withdraw, right? But in monasticism, our Christian tradition of monasticism, this withdrawal is much more long term. Right? So this information actually is sufficient for us to identify. But then the Quran helps us a little bit more. It continues about those people and says, وَأَنَّهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. And they're not an arrogant people. They're not an arrogant people. I think they will not try to impose on you their ways by trying to civilize you or any such things. They will not behave as a people, as a collective, will not be an arrogant people. So let's see if the Quran has anything to say on the subject of us Muslims forming an alliance with the Christian people or not forming an alliance. On the subject of alliance, does the Quran have anything to say? So we go to ayah number 51 of Surah Al-Ma'idah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَتَّخِذُوا الْيَهُودَ وَالنَّصَارَى أَوْلِيَاءَ. O you who have attained faith, O you who have believed, do not take Jews and Christians as your friends and allies. Is the Quran talking about all Jews and all Christians? No, that couldn't possibly be, and we'll see. It couldn't possibly be. But does the Quran then qualify which Jews and which Christians you must not form an alliance with? Yes, it does, as the ayah continues. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَتَّخِذُوا الْيَهُودَ وَالنَّصَارَى أَوْلِيَاءَ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. Those who are mutually friends and allies of each other. So it says, O you who have believed, do not form friendship and alliance with those Jews, such Jews and such Christians who themselves are allies of each other. So this is the qualifier that the Quran adds, right? Now this is a negative mention, right, of a people with whom you should not form alliance, right? But we just learned that those who will be closest to you will be Christians people who say we are Christians, right? Now, why do we interpret this as those who are mutually friends and allies of each other are to be avoided, right? For a long time, it was understood, or at least I have also come across this explanation that people have explained, that do not take Jews and Christians as friends and allies because they are allies of each other. That would not make sense because, the lived history of 1300 years of Islam, let's say, and prior to that, several centuries before the advent of Prophet ﷺ, it was known that Jews and Christians were not allies of each other, actually. The Christians viewed Jews very negatively, because in their context, Jews were responsible for killing God himself, because they regarded Sayyidina Isa as God, right? And also for slandering his mother. So there has never been love or alliance or friendship in this. So the Quran possibly could not mean that do not take them as friends and allies because they are allies of each other. Rather, the meaning of بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْض is a qualifier that do not take such Jews and such Christians as friends and allies who themselves are friends and allies of each other. Right? So centuries ago, when Muslims must have read through these verses, they must be wondering, why does the Quran say do not take Jews and Christians as allies? They are friends and allies of each other. Because they never saw Jews and Christians as friends and allies for the reason that we just mentioned. So they must have looked at it possibly with puzzlement, why Quran is saying that they are friends and allies of each other. So how then was it possible that they would become friends and allies of each other? The Quran says don't take such people who are friends and allies of each other. So what was Quran doing? The Quran was informing us that as history unfolds, in time to come, you will see a very mysterious and puzzling emergence of an alliance between a Christian people and a Muslim people, a Jewish people. When you see, as history unfolds, this alliance emerging, this might not have made sense 600 years ago or 800 years ago, but when you see this alliance coming, stay away from them. This is what the Quran was informing us. And then, this is a command from Allah. Do not take them. This is a command from Allah, right? And what if you disobey this command? What if you defy this command? Okay, the Quran continues, وَمَنْ يَتَوَلَّهُمْ مِنْكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. And whosoever takes them as friends and allies is from among them. According to the description of Quran, if you take them as friends and allies, your identity becomes a member of or a part of that group of Jews and Christians who are friends and allies of each other. This is very serious. This is very serious, right? And that is not a mere friendly advice from the Quran. It tells you very clearly, don't do this, and then it tells you what the consequences are if you disobey this command, right? And then it ends with, وَاللَّهُ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ, and surely Allah will not extend guidance to a wicked people. So it's a very, very strong verse. So let's ask ourselves a question. Has such an alliance emerged in the world as history has unfolded? Has such an alliance emerged? Does such an alliance exist? What do you think?
Yes.
It does exist. Alhamdulillah, that's a good sign. That means we have not been sleepwalking through our lives. We have observed that such an alliance has emerged, right? So, we'll return to the Quran to proceed on our topic now. The Prophet ﷺ said, you will make sulh with Rum. So the word Rum appears exactly once in the Quran. Exactly once. And the Quran mentions Rum in a positive way. The Quran mentions Rum in a positive way. The Quran has also named a surah after Rum. Okay? And this is how it mentions positively. It says, Alif Lam Mim Ghulibatir Rum. Alif Lam Mim. Rum has been defeated. Fi Adnal Ard. In a land nearby. Nearby to where? Nearby to Arabia, where the Quran was revealed, and not nearby to us here or in the land nearby, in reference to Arabia, right? وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ قَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. And they, after their defeat, will be victorious once again. They will be victorious once again. فِي بِدْعِ السَّنِينَ. In a few years. The Vividescent is an expression used in Arabic for few years, say greater than 2, but less than 10, so like 3 to 9 years. So in a few years, they will be victorious. It's on the basis of this, it was this basis, before making bets was actually pronounced as haram, especially Sayyidina Abu Bakr had made sort of halal bet based on this one. That's a separate story. He said Rome will be victorious, Rome will be victorious. And the ayah continues, Lillahi al-amr. This is a matter from Allah, meaning the matter of victory of Rome has been decided by Allah. This is a matter decided by Allah. But then it continues, min qablu wa min ba'd. Min qablu wa min ba'd. The first time around and also another time. Min qablu wa min ba'd. First time around and also a second time. Now this is interesting. This means that there will be a second time when Rome will be victorious. And then it continues after that, وَيَوْمَئِذٍ يَفْرَحُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. And on that day, mu'minun, Muslims, will celebrate. بِنَصْرِ اللَّهِ. With the help of Allah, يَنْصُرُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. And Allah will dispatch help, will dispense help as He pleases, as He wills. Right? Now clearly, this is a positive, for lack of a better word, a positive mention of Rome in the Quran. And naming the surah is also a positive thing. The question for us is, who was Rome at the time the Quran was revealed? Who was Rome at the time of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Okay. If you take, for example, the translation by Muhammad Asad, the surah, Ar-Rum, is actually translated, the title is translated as the Byzantines, the Byzantine or Byzantine Christian Empire. Right? So they had fought a war with the Persians, and this was a time when the Persians had taken much of the territory, what you might today recognize as Anatolia, south and east part of Turkey, etc., which was at that time Rome. And they had laid siege to Constantinople, which was the capital of Rome at that time, right? And it is at this time when the revelation came, right? And the defeat of Rome, the news of defeat of Rome in those days when there was no telegraph or anything, would reach rather late. But this revelation came in Mecca long before the news could reach Mecca. So the Quraysh had good reason to know that this man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was speaking not from himself, but he has divine revelation. But the Quran also said that in a few years the tables will be turned. That means Rome will be victorious, right? And this is exactly what happened after some years. And the news of the victory of Rome reached Muslims when they were wrapping up their victory in the Battle of Badr. So it has been understood that, you see, يَوْمَئِذٍ يَفْرَحُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, on that day Muslims will celebrate, means coincidentally, the news will reach or celebrate. No, actually the meaning is much more, because there is one more victory to come for Rome. Min qablu wa min ba'd. So the meaning of this is not that finite, that small, that you would coincidentally be celebrating for another reason, but rather it means that you will be celebrating the victory of Rome. So Rome is the Byzantine Christian Empire, which covers today's Turkey, and its capital was in Constantinople. And this was a city that was established by Emperor Constantine. And I believe that's where the name came, Constantinople, from him. And this city was the seat of all Christianity for some time. For some time, it was the seat of all Christianity, when Christianity was one unified faith, right? For centuries. After that, for some centuries, it was the seat of, or the headquarters of, the Orthodox Christianity. Not the Catholic or Protestant, but rather Orthodox Christianity, right? And some of the forms of Orthodox Christianity that we are familiar with are Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, etc. So when it was the seat of all of Christianity, a faction had broken away from this church. And this faction went to Rome in Italy. So we must distinguish between Rome and Rome. When we say Rome, we mean Constantinople. So faction went to Rome in Italy, right? And there they established a church. And the difference was that that church in Rome, in Italy, had the institution of papacy, meaning the head of that church was Pope. Then, sometime later, after that church was established in Rome, they told the church in Constantinople that they should yield to the Church of Rome, meaning they should accept that the church in Italy, or Rome, is the mother of all churches and should come under their wings. But Constantinople refused to do that, right? So there was a schism or split within Christianity, and the two churches separated. This came to be known as the Orthodox Church, and the church in Rome came to be known as the Latin Church, the Western Church, or the Roman Church, etc. Were different. But these were two distinct branches who were at odds with each other. Right? But the church in Rome did not give up on the idea of bringing the Orthodox Christian Church under its control. So in the year 1054, a papal delegation, or a delegation dispatched by Pope, visited Constantinople to give sort of one final warning to them, saying that they must come under the Church of Rome. Like they came there to give an ultimatum of sorts, and accept Rome as the mother of all churches. But then the Orthodox Church in Constantinople essentially told them, forget it, that's not going to happen. So this split between the Orthodox Church and the Latin Church actually was quite bitter. It was quite bitter. In 1202, the Fourth Crusade was launched by the Pope at that time, who was known as Pope Innocent III. This was the Fourth Crusade. We're not talking about the original crusade launched by Pope Urban, I believe, right? This is the Fourth Crusade. So soldiers from Western lands, particularly Genoa in Italy, Marseille, and in Flanders, which is on the Belgium and Netherlands border, they all sailed to go to Jerusalem via Egypt on crusade. Right? But then instead of going to Egypt through the Mediterranean as they were sailing, they made a left turn and stopped at Constantinople. And there they attacked the city, they looted it, they pillaged it. And this left turn was not an accident. It was not a mere, they didn't stop there to pick up supplies so that they could sail on further. On that crusade, there were two targets. One was Constantinople, which is Orthodox Christianity. The other was Jerusalem. So the second target was Muslims, Islam. But that attack essentially broke the straw, or was the straw that broke the camel's back, as the saying goes, and the relations between the two churches were very, very bitter. Later on, there was a split within Western Christianity also. So in the 1500s, the Protestant branch of Christianity emerged from the Mother Church of Rome. Protestantism, emerged out of there, right? And within 1500s, in the same century also, within Protestant church, there was within the Western, there was another branching off, which was the formation of the Church of England. And there's an interesting side story about how Church of England came to be established. Was that Henry VII was the King of England at that time. And he was married to Catherine of Aragon, which is in Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Portugal, that area, right? He was married to Catherine of Aragon. And he wanted to marry another woman named Anne Boleyn. But then the church in England at that time was under the Pope. But before he could marry Anne Boleyn, his marriage to Catherine had to be annulled first. But the authority to annul a marriage rested with the Pope. Now there was a fly in the ointment there, which is that Catherine of Aragon was the sister of the King of Portugal. Okay, and King of Portugal was a friend of the Pope. And the Pope refused to annul the marriage. But at that time, Henry VII must have said to himself, well, if the church is not going to let us marry Anne Boleyn, then our Majesty will establish our own church. And that's how the Church of England came into being. Incidentally, Catherine of Aragon was the daughter of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon. Those who have read history, you will identify these two names. They were the principal authors of, we can say, executors of Spanish Inquisition, during which Muslims and Jews were hounded, forced to convert, they're tortured, burned, etc. So you know the history of the Spanish Inquisition, right? So anyway, that was a side story. But today, in summary, we have these branches. You have the Eastern Orthodox Christianity, or the Orthodox Christianity, and then you have the Western Church. Part A would be Catholic, and Part B will be the Protestant Church, right? Now we know where Western Christianity is located. We know where it's located, right? It's located in Western Europe, in North America, etc., etc. The Protestant branch and flavors of it, right? And we also know, we are looking for our room. We're trying to identify which is Rome, who is Rome, with whom an alliance would emerge, right? So, but this Western Christian world, is it in alliance with Israel? Yeah. It is in alliance with Israel. So according to Surah Al-Ma'idah, we can rule out this Christianity being the room with whom we will be making an alliance, right? The Western Christianity, furthermore, has discarded the practice of monasticism. There is no monasticism practiced. I mean, it's at best you can say it is it's an irreversible decline. That is the best statement you can make. But also the Western Christian powers. Look at it: Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands. They actually occupied or colonized so much of the world, and you cannot separate that colonization from the attribute of arrogance. The stated purpose was that is it time for Adhan? Okay. So it cannot be separated from arrogance. They came. One of the stated purpose was that they've come to civilize the natives. This narrative existed for centuries. This is not theorizing about it. So our room lies in the other Christianity, which is the Orthodox Christianity. This is the inference we draw from it. In order for us to look for our room, we have to look in the Eastern Orthodox Christianity, right? Which is the Christianity of Constantinople. And today, this Orthodox Christianity predominates in numerous countries in Eastern Europe. For example, Belarus, Bulgaria, Romania, Cyprus, Greece, Macedonia, Moldova, Montenegro, Serbia, and of course also in Russia, the big country, right? So our room is located today in the Eastern Europe. Right? If we ask the Orthodox Christians today, if we ask them the following question, your religion's headquarters used to be located in Constantinople, but where is it today? What answer will they give us? They will tell us that after the capture of Constantinople by Ottomans, the establishment of the church in Constantinople decided to move the Orthodox Church to Russia, specifically to Moscow. Excuse me. And here is some interesting history surrounding this. That at the time of the fall of Constantinople, Ivan III was the ruler of Russia. And so after Constantinople was lost, he took the church of Constantinople under his wings. He became the protector of the church, right? At that time, you know what the coat of arms or emblem is for any entity, a church or an empire, right? You would have, like some empires would have a lion with a sword in hand and things like that, right? So the emblem of the Eastern Orthodox Church was a two-headed eagle. Ivan III incorporated that emblem, the two-headed eagle, into the Russian emblem, the Russian king's emblem. Prior to that, the Russian emblem did not have the two-headed eagle. And actually, if you see some documentaries about the Bolshevik Revolution, the Communist Revolution in Russia, you'll see that these crowds are tearing down the big emblem from the walls of the palace, right? Even in those documentaries, you can identify the two-headed eagle. I mean, this is just interesting side history, right? The Byzantine rulers in Rome, they were known by what name? In Arabic? Caesar of Rome, Caesar of Rome. The rulers of Byzantium were known as Caesars, right? Ivan III was the first Russian ruler to give himself the title of Tsar, C-Z-A-R or T-S-A-R as it's written but pronounced Tsar. Tsar is actually Russian for Caesar or Caesar. So this is like historical evidence that the church had not just physically, but in all its aspect, had essentially moved to Moscow, Russia at that time. And this tradition of the Russian kings being protectors of Eastern Orthodox Christianity continued until the time of Nicholas II, who was the last Tsar of Russia at the time of the Bolshevik or Communist Revolution, right? But after the Bolshevik Revolution, Tsar Nicholas and his entire family, his wife Alexandra, his son Alexei, and his daughters Maria, Olga, Tatiana, and Anastasia, they were all taken to a place in the Ural Mountains in a town called Yekaterinburg. And in the middle of the night, when they were called down, and they were shot and killed. So with the extinction of that entire family of Nicholas II, you can say, metaphorically speaking, the Eastern Orthodox Church or Orthodox Church was left without any patron or protector. The Eastern Orthodox Christianity still retains in it the monastic tradition. Actually, the Greeks are very proud of their monasteries, and you'll find this monastic tradition today in Russia, in Bulgaria, in Romania, in those countries still. And after the departure of communism, these countries, especially Russia, have been returning to faith, and the practice of monasticism is increasing and is thriving actually. So we have to bear in mind the room of Quran or in the Hadith is not a church or a cathedral building. It's not an establishment of a church alone. It is a state. Remember, Rome was defeated. Ghulibat al-Rum, and then it's going to be victorious once again. So this Rome would be a state which has power and will be capable of waging war. So we shouldn't think of it as merely as some sort of a church entity, right? I mean, one example one could think of is similar to like Vatican, which really have no power to wage war and things. It's merely an entity, right? But this room that Quran talks about, or the Hadith talks about, will be a state which will be capable of waging war. So we observe that the most powerful state in the Eastern Orthodox world today is what? Russia, right? And it is also now the seat of the Orthodox Church. Moscow is the seat of Orthodox Church, which used to be the church in Constantinople. So our conclusion, our inference from what we have learned is that the alliance that Rasulullah talked about will be with the Eastern Orthodox Europe led by Russia. Now let us examine, this may be contrary to our perceptions, but if you have any other stronger evidence, etc., we should make it part of our learning discourse, inshallah, in Q&A. So let's examine the historical relationship between Muslims and Rome. Can such an alliance emerge? What has been our relationship with them? What kind of relationships have we enjoyed or they enjoyed with each other, essentially, right? But if you look at the relationship, it makes the emergence of this alliance seemingly impossible. There has been such a difficult relationship. The alliance seems seemingly impossible. The Prophet ﷺ prophesied, لَتَفْتَحَنَّ الْقُسْطَنْطِنِيَّةَ وَلَنَعْمَ الْأَمِيرُ آمِرُهَا وَلَنَعْمَ الْجَيْشُ ذَلِكَ الْجَيْشُ. That means you will certainly, he placed emphasis, you will certainly conquer Constantinople. And he praised what an Amir that will be who will capture Constantinople. What a commander that will be, and what an army that will be under him that will capture Constantinople. So, the Ottoman Empire was a neighbor of Rome. In the year 1453, the Ottoman Sultan Muhammad Fatih attacked and captured Constantinople. This is history. The year was 1453, right? And of course, in the Ottoman forces, there were three kinds of soldiers. There were those who were recruited for the campaign only. They were recruited. There's a campaign that will be coming up. So they would come as temporary soldiers, you can say. They swell the numbers. And then there were the regular soldiers, your cavalry, etc., etc., etc. But also the Ottomans used to have an elite force called the Janissaries. I believe in Arabic it's called Inkishari or something. Anybody's aware? Inkishari? Janissaries is the anglicized name of it, the English name for it, right? These were the armies, right? And if we have time in Q&A, we'll explain a little bit more about how Janissaries came about and their context and background. So, after a victory, it was customary that soldiers, collected booty. You can call that, or you can call looting, whatever that happened, right? And it used to be a tradition that they would do it for 3 days and the Sultan would say stop. But in case of Constantinople, after 1 day or so, the Sultan put a halt to this collection of booty, etc. And then after that, the Sultan rode straight into Constantinople and went straight to the cathedral, which was known as Hagia Sophia, or in Turkish it is known as Hagia Sophia. So he rode straight to that church, right? And the cathedral is not merely a church building. It is the mother of all church or a subgroup. It is the headquarters of a faith. So for Eastern Orthodox Christianity, that Hagia Sophia was what Vatican is to the Catholics, or you would say what Haram is to the Muslim. So it was very revered. It was the focus of their faith. And that church was a magnificent building. It was built nearly 1,000 years before Sultan Muhammad Fateh actually captured it. It was built, I believe, in 530 or so, more than 3 decades before the birth of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This building was a magnificent building. It still is a magnificent building, and it was built by Emperor Justinian. Emperor Justinian had built that building. And historical records show that in the capture of the Hagia Sophia, the cathedral, also some bloodshed took place inside the premises of the cathedral. So after this, the Sultan in Hagia Sophia ordered his muezzin or his sheikh to go rise up to the pulpit. But the Hagia Sophia also had a pulpit from where the priest would give sermons, right, or give khutbah, and proclaim shahada or give azan or something of that. And then he ordered that from this day onwards, this cathedral will be a masjid, sort of a jewel in the crown of Islam. I don't know how many of you feel that acquiring a cathedral or church in this manner, coercive manner, to say the least, would be a jewel in the crown of Islam. Would you today, for example, theorize that Muslims from somewhere close to Rome, close to Vatican, let's say across the Adriatic Sea from Bosnia, etc., they go capture Vatican and convert it? Would that be a jewel in the crown of Islam? Even capture of an ordinary temple or church building was not. You contrast this. Contrast this with what Sayyidina Umar did. Amr bin al-As asked him to come over because he would not be able to receive the keys from the Christian priests in Jerusalem, right? The keys to Jerusalem. They said, we have in our traditions written that this can only be handed over to the leader of Muslims. So Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu traveled all the way to Jerusalem, right? When he was there with the priests, it was time for Salah, and they offered, pray here. What did he do? He refused to pray there. He says he feared that after him some people might use it as a pretext to occupy and convert that into a masjid. Right? So, you see the contrast? A huge contrast, all right? So given that the Quran and Hadith taken together inform us that Muslims will make an end-time alliance with Rome, whose capital was Constantinople, why then did the Ottomans, why did they attack Constantinople? Was the Prophet's praise of that commander reserved for anyone who captures Constantinople by hook or by the crook? This is a question for an academic discourse and in a discourse of learning. We must ask such questions, right? Although we have lived with these quote-unquote supposed knowledge that that's what it was. And for a few centuries, Muslims have uncritically accepted that that was the manifestation of the prophecy of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the capturing of Constantinople, then by Sultan Muhammad Fateh. Well, let's try to analyze this. Could it have been that the manifestation of the Prophet's prophecy? Let's try to analyze it. You see, there existed a sulh, there existed a treaty between Constantinople and the Ottomans. Yet, as we see in the history, Sultan Muhammad Fateh was preparing for the capture, to attack Constantinople and capture it. Now, that's not nice. If you have an agreement with someone that you will not have a fight, and then you start a fight, that's a breach of your contract, breach of agreement. How does Surah Al-Ma'idah begin? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu awfu bil uqud. When you shake and you make an agreement, you must keep it. So, would Prophet ﷺ, this is a question I leave to you, would Prophet ﷺ praise someone who violates the commandment of Allah in the Quran in this context. One thing to say. The Prophet ﷺ, who was appointed as the teacher of the Quran for mankind, taught us that there is a certain method in warfare. So we need to also examine, was the method used in that war, in accordance with the teaching of the Prophet ﷺ? If not, would then the Prophet ﷺ praise someone who violates the rules or laws laid down for warfare? It's another question that we should ask. And finally, how should we feel about turning into masjid of the greatest cathedral of Christianity, but at that time, let's say the Orthodox Christianity, right? This, if you are an Orthodox Christian, this would be like a hot knife being driven through your heart. Think of it, if the tables are turned and you are on the receiving end, how you would feel, right? And Islam is very sensitive to everybody's feeling, particularly group feelings, etc. Very, very sensitive. One only has to look at the Mithaq of Medina, the constitution of the Pact of Medina, how rights of the different groups were preserved very, very sensitively. Would Prophet ﷺ praise someone who, in such coercive manner, captures a cathedral and converts it into a masjid, right? So were the actions and the behavior of the Sultan as the commander and his army, were these actions honorable or not? That is a question we should ask. We say very clearly that the Prophet ﷺ, we know our Prophet, he would never, never, never condone, let alone praise such actions. So, but for the more than 5.5 centuries, we have lived with this supposed knowledge that Prophet ﷺ had actually praised that action. So on the basis of evidence examined so far, we say with confidence that the conquest of Constantinople prophesied by Rasulullah ﷺ was not the conquest that was undertaken by Sultan Muhammad Fatih. Now, I know this may be, because we have lived with certain history or historical narrative, it may be difficult for people. But in academic discourse, in a discourse of learning and discourse of knowledge, one must critique and challenge these things. And if there are arguments, one must, address those arguments. So the conquest of Constantinople is actually yet to come, because that was not the conquest. Is there any evidence in the body of ahadith? There is evidence from the body of ahadith, and we'll look at it now. The Prophet ﷺ actually gave a sequence of events in the end of history the last age. We're not talking about the end of the world or the end of the material universe. We are talking about the end of history, when truth will triumph over falsehood. The hadith goes, Umranu Bayt al-Maqdis wa Kharabu Yathrib. Kharabu Yathrib, Khuruj al-Malhama. Khuruj al-Malhama, Fath al-Constantinia. Fath al-Constantinia, Khuruj al-Dajjal. So the hadith says this in a manner where it gives us a sequence in which these events will occur. So, and this was narrated by the young Sahabi Mu'adh ibn Jabal, radiallahu anhu. And the emphasis in this hadith is recorded in the words of Mu'adh ibn Jabal himself. He said that when Prophet ﷺ told him this, he tapped me on my shoulder or knee, depending on different narrations you look at. And he said, Ya Mu'adh, this is as true as the fact that you are sitting in front of me. Meaning, Mu'adh was saying, Prophet ﷺ emphasized that this is how it's going to happen. Now, this hadith is from Sunan Abi Dawud, by the way. And we notice in this hadith that the conquest of Constantinople is to occur after the Khuruj of Malhama and before the Khuruj of Dajjal. Now, Malhama is a great conflict in which much of the world will perish. Rasulullah ﷺ said, described Malhama would be a conflict in which the bird flying will fall down. This is how he described Malhama. Right? So the question for us is, has the Malhama occurred yet? Right? Did Malhama occur before the fall of that Constantinople, when Sultan Muhammad captured? No, it did not occur. So that hadith said it will be afterwards. Right? So this hadith shows us that this is the conquest that has not yet occurred, and it is to occur in times to come. Now there's more evidence from another hadith from Sunan Abi Dawud also. This hadith that actually appears right after the hadith I just mentioned in Sunan Abi Dawud is also narrated by Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Okay. And according to this hadith, the hadith says that the time between the conquest of Constantinople and appearance of Dajjal is 7 months. The time between conquest of Constantinople and the appearance of Dajjal, the khuruj of Dajjal, is 7 months. But then from that conquest of Constantinople, 562 years have passed. But we have not seen the appearance of Dajjal, right? So this is another hadith which argues against the notion that that was the conquest that Prophet ﷺ had actually praised. You see, in today's world, there has been a prolific propaganda against Islam. The most prolific one has been that Islam spread by sword. Anybody here who did not hear that? Everybody has heard that. Islam spread by sword. Right? But in giving examples about Muslims' conquest by sword, you would rarely, almost never, I would say, I had myself never heard the mention of the conquest of Constantinople by sword as an example. It seems, it seems by not mentioning that someone is trying to keep our attention away from the subject of Constantinople. Nobody mentions that, look, Muslims conquered the world by sword. Here's an example. They don't try to mention Constantinople. And the question is, who is trying to keep our attention away from Constantinople. And if we come to Q&A and questions come, and inshallah we'll try to address that issue. So, when Prophet ﷺ established the seat of a state in Medina, after some time, Amir Muawiyah took that out to Damascus. You can see the Prophet established it here and he took it out. It's not kind of nice to take it, right? But it was in the Arab world. But the Ottomans took the Khilafah from the Arab world and took it to Constantinople. Constantinople today is known as what city? Istanbul. It's not Istanbul, the city is Istanbul. By the way, there's a law on the books in Turkey that you cannot refer to the city by the name Constantinople. You could be arrested for naming that city, referring to that city as Constantinople. You must ask us the question, what is so terrible about it, right? Especially, Rasulullah ﷺ called it Constantinople. Then out of love for Rasulullah ﷺ, wouldn't you want to refer to that city as Constantinople, Constantinople? This is something to keep in mind, So, the bringing of that Khilafah, which represented the rule of Islam on parts of earth, right? That institution, bringing it from there and transplanting it into Constantinople, which was the heart of Orthodox Christianity, after capturing their cathedral, which was their mother church or mother cathedral, how injurious was that to the relationship between two peoples, the Christians, the Rome, and the Muslims, about whom Prophet ﷺ said they will form an alliance in times to come. Very, very injurious. So it would seem that it's very difficult, or the emergence of this alliance may be impossible. How they felt, it manifested in different ways. This hatred, there's intense hatred for Islam in Eastern Europe, intense hatred. And we know it appeared in our lifetime as we were growing up, and we witnessed that in the form of the atrocities committed against Muslims in Bosnia. You know Bosnia, right? So it's not entirely in a vacuum, meaning it has the baggage of centuries of history. So I think there are a number of questions, a number of things that I would like to address, but I'm hoping that it will come in the Q&A. So I leave you with some other question. Didn't the Ottomans know, for example, didn't Sultan Fateh or his scholars know that Prophet ﷺ had prophesied that there will be an alliance with Rome? By that time, there's no ambiguity. Rome was there, right? Why would you take such an action then? This is something that we need to look at, think about, ponder. The answers may not come just like that, but we need to ponder about these things. Because after all, as the events unfold in the world, we as Muslims have a duty to understand what is happening around us, right? So, who is this mastermind who has been trying to undermine the relationship between Rome and the world of Islam, trying to prevent an alliance emerging? And with that question, I leave you. Maybe we'll cover this and something else in the Q&A session. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillah.